that you lifted something up to God, one of your concerns, instead of lifting it to somebody else. You know, Habakkuk knows exactly where to go to. He knows to the person, to the God who created the universe, who's in control of every single thing. He lifts that up to God. He lifts it up to nobody else. But here's the other thing. In our English translation, it says, "How long, O Lord?" But in the original, what he's saying is he's saying, "How long?" And he's using God's personal name, Yahweh. And this is the same name that we're told in Exodus 20 when the Ten Commandments are given, not to use this name in vain. This is God's personal name. The reason why it's translated that way is because the Jews were so afraid that they'd be taking the Lord's name in vain that they decided just to translate it as Lord. And so in English, we've kept with that tradition. But what he's saying is, God, I know who you are. I have a personal relationship with you. You are Yahweh, and I am your servant. It's the same thing Jonah says when the fishermen and the sailors are saying, what's going on here? He goes, I belong to Yahweh, the one who created the seas and the universe. So he knows who Yahweh is. He knows who Lord is, and he's lifting that up to him. He has a personal relationship. Not only is he skilled and should know the Word of God, but he has that personal connection with Yahweh, Lord. But there's also a sense of urgency in this. How long, O Lord? And we see that tension throughout the Bible. The people who are wondering when God is going to respond. How long is this going to go on? But here he is. He's saying, God, you have not answered yet. How long is this going to go on? What's going on here? Let's move on, though. And he says, I call for help. How long will I call for help and you'll not hear? So he's crying out for help. There's help that he needs from something. And he's saying, God, I need you to come down and do something about this. But you're not listening. Now that word hear, here's another thing. The word hear is not just simply physical hearing. That's the same word. It means to hear, to listen, to do something. It's to take it in and to do something. So he's saying, God, I'm calling out to you. How long am I going to call out to you? And you're not doing anything. He's essentially saying, God, I need you to act, but you're not doing it when I need you to do it. You're not taking it in and you're not going to do something about it. In the Old Testament, we're called to hear and obey God's word. And that's what he's saying. He's saying, God, I need you to hear and I need you to do what I need you to do. And he's saying God's not even responding. Have you ever been around somebody before and you've talked at them and you've talked with them and then once it's all over, they just stand there? I do it all the time. Somebody says something to me and then I'm not really there. I used to substitute teach in Brea. I just moved up to San Francisco a year ago. So I was a missionary kid, moved to Orange County. So Orange County is my home though. So I substitute taught in Brea for 2 years. And I really did not enjoy subbing for elementary. Because elementary, they give you the appearance that they're listening. You know, at least in high school, you know they're not listening. And you just give them a worksheet. You know, you say, here you go, and they're like, okay, I'll do it, and the worksheet's on the floor, and they're out. But elementary, they act sweet, and they act kind, and then so you go up behind them, you show them, yellow goes here, blue goes here. We're going to do this together. And so then you go up behind, you know, Jimmy here, and you say, Jimmy, you're doing a good job. Okay, now, one more time, yellow here and blue here, and then you come 5 minutes later, and you know he's done nothing because he's been sitting there thinking about Chuck E. Cheese the whole time. And that's the most frustrating thing, is that you have to come up behind them and say, what are you doing? I had one kid in the junior high one time who I was doing the lesson on the board. And I was saying, okay, and this is how we do, we had the lesson, it was a math lesson. All of a sudden, he starts busting out laughing. And he's just laughing in class. I said, what are you doing? He goes, oh, I'm thinking of something from Family Guy. It's so funny. And I said, well, what does that have to do with anything here? But so this is what he's saying essentially. God, I'm calling out to you and I'm telling you this is what needs to happen, but you're not doing it. It's like I'm just shooting up prayers for, I'm sending a message out in a bottle essentially. And this is what he's saying. This is what he's saying. God, this is what I'm calling out. This is what I need you to fix. If you look down, he says this in 2. He says, I cry out to you, violence. And yet you do not save. Why do you make me see iniquity and cause me to look on wickedness? There's things going on. It's a violent place right now in Israel. For him, especially at that time. If we think things are bad now, it was pretty bad then as well. and cause me to look on wickedness. Yes, destruction and violence are before me. Strife exists and contention arises. Therefore the law is ignored and justice is never upheld. The wicked surround the righteous, therefore justice comes out perverted. He's got this national message, this burden. He's so concerned about the state of his nation and the things that are going on. And in his time, he's saying things are violent. There's no such thing as justice. And some of those things, some of us are burdened by those same things in our culture today, in our country today. We say things are too violent. There's no such thing as justice. But it's interesting. This is his burden. This is the specific burden that he had for his people. But it's interesting that the burdens that we all have. I go to a men's Bible study over at the church I'm at outside San Francisco. And in the mornings when we're sharing in our Bible study time, just what's on our hearts. It's so interesting the different things that are going on in each person's lives as they're pouring out what they want to be prayed for. This guy over here he's concerned for the nation. Every time, every Thursday morning, it is, I want to pray for what's going on in this state over here with the floods here, or I'm concerned about what's going on with this. The other guy's concerned about our troops. And the other guy next to him is always, it's about something with a medical illness with his wife. And the other guy's got kid problems. And the other one's got divorce problems. And so each and every one of us has different burdens. So I want you to get in your mind at this point, while we're reading the rest of this up, what burden do you have? That maybe that you have sent up to God, that you've prayed about, or a burden that's just on your heart that you hadn't even given up to God yet. Think about that. Habakkuk had a burden that he brought before God, that he was concerned that wasn't going to be met. I want you to get that in your mind as we keep reading, though. It could be something that at home. It could be something related to your spouse. It could be something that is related to your children. It could be something at work, where you're afraid that the company's going to get shut down, or that you're going to lose your job because there's cutbacks, or that, I feel like that sometimes. Maybe it's a relationship issue. Somebody that was very close to you is no longer very close to you because of something they've done. It could be anything, but what is that burden that's on your heart? That's what I want you to get in your mind right now. Maybe it's not a huge burden. Maybe it's not something huge. Maybe it's not divorce, or maybe it's not illness. Maybe it's not cancer or anything like that. Maybe it's just simple uncertainty. I'm trying to move into this house right now, and I'm just waiting to see if the bank's going to come through on this. We want to kind of go to something bigger, or we want to kind of go to something small. Maybe that we find the right. So maybe it's not a huge burden, but what is that thing that's on your heart that creates some sort of uncertainty when you bring that up to God? And look at God's response, though. Habakkuk just poured out his heart to God. And God's response is this. He says this, "Look amongst the nations, observe, be astonished, wonder." And now get this. This is the point right here. "Because I am doing something in your days you would not believe if you were told." Now we read on to find out that what God is doing is something that later Habakkuk is saying, maybe you want to hold off on that. But God is saying here the whole time, I am doing something. Habakkuk is pouring out his heart to God, saying, you're not even listening, but the whole time God said, I've been doing something. I am doing something. Notice that God doesn't rebuke him. God doesn't say, how dare you ask me where I am? How dare you say I don't listen? Do you know who I am? I mean, God hears everything, sees everything, and God's first response to Habakkuk is not, don't talk to me like that. Don't bring that to me. He says, behold, I am doing something. It's similar to that image that we see in Matthew 11 when John the Baptist is in jail. And he's concerned, and he's wondering if Christ is really who he says he is. This is the same guy who led the way. He led the way for Jesus to come. He's the same one who said that I must decrease so that he must increase. He knew him very, very well. At the end of his life, he says, are you the one? Are we waiting for somebody else? And what's Jesus' response? Jesus doesn't go back and say, look, man, you're done. I thought we had this together. No. It's the same thing that we see God doing here, because God was the same in the Old Testament as he is in the New Testament. He doesn't rebuke him. He says, look, I am doing something. It's similar to kind of what we see in Job. You know, sometimes we see in Job, he's got this crisis going on in Job. And Job is in the middle of this, just things happening with him. And the whole time, you know, God's been in control the whole time. And at the very end, God comes and says, look what's been happening. This is what's been going on. God finally gives him his answer after. And Job has been saying, you know, I'm righteous. I hadn't done anything wrong. And God finally talks to him. But it's a similar picture we have there. Psalm 40, verse 1 says this, though. This is what I want you to listen to. He says, I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined to me and heard my cry. Now, sometimes God doesn't move in our own timing. God is doing something, and God is moving. God is in control of everything. And the psalmist says, I waited patiently, and the Lord heard my cry. It's the same thing we see in 2 Peter, where people are saying, well, Christ isn't coming back. It's been too long. And Peter says, no, he's coming back. He said, a day is as 1,000 years, as 1,000 years as a day of the Lord. So sometimes, though, and this is what essentially God has been saying to Habakkuk, is I've been doing something the whole time. He's not giving him his response right when Habakkuk says it, because Habakkuk says, I've been saying this for a long, but you're not listening. And finally, in God's timing, he answers him. So what does this mean for us? I think sometimes it's easy for us to look at a story like Habakkuk and go, well, that's, you know, whatever, that's his situation. Because sometimes we don't take ourselves out and say, or put ourselves in his shoes, say, look at all the stuff that's swirling around him. When we step back and look and we say, of course God was in control the whole time, big deal. We fail to look and say, if we're there together with him, all we're seeing is what's around us. We don't see that God is preparing a nation to come in and to make judgment upon Israel there. And we need to realize that Habakkuk's problem and his crisis and his burden is the same feelings and emotions that we have as we get in our own crises and we get in our own burdens. That as we stand here and we're Christ, we have things that are on our hearts that we want to pour out to God. And God is moving and God is doing something even though we can't see it happening. So where are you today? You know, here's my question. Maybe there's people in here who just need to say, well, I hadn't even thought to ever give it up to God yet. I hadn't even thought I have this burden. Maybe I should share it with God or bring it before God. Maybe you think it's too small. Maybe you don't think that God cares about whether or not you're going to sell this and this is all going to work out. And maybe it's huge and you've just been neglecting bringing it before God. Maybe you need to do that. Maybe you're here and you've given something up to God and you've said, God, this is my crisis. This is my pain and I need you to act. But you really don't trust him to do it. You don't really think he's doing it. You're just kind of sending it up there because that's what a good Christian should do. We should just call out and hand it out to God. And maybe you've been impatient, though. Maybe you've been waiting and God's not moving in your time. And maybe you need to think about that for a moment and realize that God is moving and God is acting. One thing we need to do as Christians and as believers, if we have a personal relationship with Christ, and we believe that God is moving and acting and in control of our whole universe, we need to be watching and waiting and looking for his response. How many times have you offered up a prayer and said, God, I need you to fix this. I need you to be involved in my life, and then forgot about it a week later? It's answered, but yet you don't really realize that God did it. One of the things we did in seminary, and we learned, there was so much stuff that I appreciate, but this is one of the small little things, practical things that I just thought was incredible. They said, start journaling your prayers out. And so I did. And I did in the past, and I've gone through some of my old stuff. I used to be in a little punk rock band in high school. And so sometimes I'd have some prayers written out as well. And I've looked back, and these were my crises at 15. Okay? And these are the things that I remember pouring out to God. These are the things that were on my heart that I said, God, this is my crisis right now. I need you to get it out. When am I getting my girlfriend? When is that going to finally happen? Am I going to finally ever pass this driving exam? I failed it once before, God. Will you do this and come through for me? God, what about this college? Am I going to get into this? And these are things that I haven't looked back until now to see, but God was involved with every one of those. Now, that girlfriend's long gone, and I'm glad that he took that one out of the way. But there are so many things that we write down and we say, God, this is my burden.